Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. All right, well, we're back. In puppy news, my puppy has had to be banished from the record room because he was in a very feisty mood and he had figured out how to squeak his squeak toys. So it's just me on what time? It's like Sunday, late Sunday night recording this for you. And we're continuing with the tale of Odysseus. And let's just get into it, shall we? Okay, here we go. Odysseus, the Whirpool, and the Six-Headed Monster, as told by Nanny Piggins. The children rushed home from school the next day. Well, they rushed home from the bus stop. The bus never rushed anywhere, which is only wise. Driving a 10-ton vehicle full of children in a reckless manner is a recipe for disaster. Apart from anything else, if you accidentally hit something, the children will make fun of you, which for many bus drivers is a torture worse than any punishment inflicted by a court of law. Derek, Samantha and Michael burst back into their home. Fortunately, the lock on the front door was broken because just the previous day, Nanny Piggins had been out in the garden when she realised her cinnamon buns needed to come out of the oven. In situations that urgent, there's no time for keys or door handles. The lock had been totally destroyed, which is why the Greek children had easy access. The children soon found Nanny Piggins hard at work in the kitchen, making their afternoon tea, a block of chocolate on a plate each. Nanny Piggins was not a culinary snob. She knew that chocolate soufflés, chocolate ganache and chocolate-flavoured crème brûlées are all very well, but sometimes the simplest meals are the best. "What's wrong?" asked Nanny Piggins. "Nothing," said Samantha. "Well, I did only get 39% in my maths test," said Michael. "But it's not because I didn't know the answers. It's because I fell asleep in the exam." "Of course you did," said Nanny Piggins. "That's the brain's natural response to trauma. It shuts down to protect itself. I'm surprised more maths students aren't narcoleptic." "We ran home because you promised to tell us the next instalment of the story of Odysseus," said Derek. "I did," said Nanny Piggins. "What a good childcare worker I am. I know many nannies focus so much on forcing their charges to eat vegetables, they entirely neglect the classics. As a result, their children have no idea how naughty the ancient Greek gods were." "So where was I up to?" "Odysseus and her men had just safely sailed past the Sirens," said Michael. "And Circe had warned Odysseus about even more dangerous dangers that were coming up. But Odysseus hadn't told her men because she didn't want to frighten them," said Samantha. "Yes, those poor men," said Nanny Piggins. "The Odyssey really was a tremendously ill-fated journey. Even worse than getting the bus to school." "The bus to school isn't that bad," said Derek. "We've never been attacked by monsters on the bus to school." "No, but at the end of the journey you do end up at school," said Nanny Piggins, "and there are maths teachers there." The children shuddered. They hadn't thought about it that way. "Odysseus was attacked by monsters and cannibals and giants and sirens and natural disasters, but at least at the end of the journey he was going to be at a beautiful Greek island. So school, compared to the Odyssey, it's just swings and roundabouts, really." "But anyway, what happened next?" asked Michael. "OK, you better tuck into your chocolate," said Nanny Piggins. "Sugar is good for shock prevention, and the tale I'm about to tell is perilous indeed." So Derek, Samantha and Michael picked up their chocolate bars, took big bites, and Nanny Piggins began her tale. Odysseus and her men had just sailed past the murderous sirens and were feeling very clever because they'd pulled off the old beeswax in the ears trick, when up ahead they heard a terrible clashing, splashing, gurgling sound. "What was it?" asked Michael. "It was the deadly clashing rocks." "Is that the same clashing rocks from the story of Jason and the Argonauts?" asked Michael. "Yes, indeed," said Nanny Piggins. "But I thought they stopped clashing when Jason successfully sailed through them," said Derek. "Yes, that is the way the story ended," agreed Nanny Piggins. "But the storytellers from the ancient Greek mythology days decided to make them start clashing again, because giant clashing rocks are really cool, and they wanted to use them to clash in other stories. So stop applying logic and reason and remembering details. It'll only ruin this story, and you don't want that, do you?" "No, Nanny Piggins," chorused the children. Anyway, as I was saying, up ahead were the clashing rocks, and they'd got even more ferocious through the ages. At least the way the storytellers described them had got more ferocious. Now they didn't just clash, they also spewed out molten lava from the fiery depths of the earth, which caused enormous plumes of steam as the red-hot liquid rock flowed into the sea. "Cool," said Michael. "Actually, it was the opposite," said Nanny Piggins. "It was very hot. The heat from the lava made the men on Odysseus's boat sweat as they rowed." "Quick, men," urged Odysseus. "Row with all your might. Like Jason and the Argonauts, we must shoot through between the clashing rocks as fast as we can." Now, the men were kind of ticked off to have this sprung on them. They hadn't done any training. Luckily, they had done a lot of carb loading at Circe's house by eating a lot of cake. And they were very, very fit from all the escaping monsters they'd had to do during the course of their journey. In fact, they were the 50 fittest of the men Odysseus had set out with, because the 500 less fit men had already been eaten by monsters along the way. So, with a lot of strenuous rowing, they did indeed shoot through the gap in the clashing rocks, between its big bashes. But when they were safely through, the men did not cheer and celebrate. They were too exhausted. They slumped across their oars and started complaining. "You should have warned us that was coming up," complained Eurylochus. "Yeah, sorry about that," said Odysseus. "It slipped my mind. I was too busy worrying about the next thing we have to deal with." "What next thing?" asked Eurylochus. Said Polites. "Do you mean that massive, terrifying whirlpool up ahead?" All the men looked in the direction Polites was pointing. The sinking tide rushing through the narrow strait beyond the clashing rocks was causing a huge whirlpool to spin in the water. Masts and oars and timbers from previous shipwrecks was already whipping around in the whirlpool like banana chunks in a blender when you make a smoothie. And as the spiral of water spun down into the depths of the ocean, it made a terrible gurgling sound like all the miseries of the sea were being let out in one long, continuous wail. "I don't want to be a sailor anymore," declared Polites. "I want to go home," said Eurylochus. "Men, we can do this," urged Odysseus. "We are the heroes of Troy. We vanquished the Cyclops. We escaped the Lotus Eaters. We have journeys to Hades and back together, so we can survive this whirlpool. But to do so, we must work together and row as hard as we can. Come on now, row! 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 Odysseus beat out a rhythm on the bow of the ship, and much as the men wanted to take a little nap, they didn't want to join their friends in the afterlife just yet, so they bent their backs and rowed as hard as they could. The pull of the whirlpool was strong. The ship listed as it was drawn into the lip of the spiralling water, but Odysseus's men were not heroes for nothing. They rose to the challenge and rowed with all their might, and eventually they began to make progress and draw the ship away from the mighty current. Unfortunately, however, the men were so focused on their task of surviving the whirlpool that they had not paid any attention to the cliff they were sailing past. Odysseus was controlling the helm, and she had steered them as close as possible to the cliffs. The men could have lifted a hand and touched the smooth alabaster cliff face, but they didn't because they couldn't afford to relax their grip on their oars for even 1 second, or they'd be sucked back into the whirlpool. which was for the best, because if they had known what Odysseus knew, they would have realised that the whirlpool was nothing. What they should really fear lay in that cliff face, because several 100 metres up, higher than any arrow could reach, there was a cave. It was the only opening on the cliff face. There were no handholds or rocks that could be used to climb to this cave. There was no way even cunning Odysseus could attack it. And Odysseus knew what lay within that cave, and it was terrifying. She couldn't take her eyes off it. She had donned her armour and held a spear in each hand, ready and waiting to try to defend her men. As the ship moved further from the whirlpool, the men began to relax. "Oh, phew, that was close," said Polites. "You don't tell us about the clashing rocks, and then you don't tell us about the deadly whirlpool? What else haven't you told us about?" demanded Eurylochus. Well, said Odysseus. "Boss," said Polites, "why are you wearing your armour and holding 2 spears?" But Odysseus never got to answer, because in the blink of an eye, they found out. Scylla was upon them. Scylla was a horrible giant lizard who lived in the cave above. Her body never left the cave, but she had 6 heads on 6 long necks, and they would whip out and snatch up passing prey. Usually it was dolphins or seals, but if there was a ship, the 6 heads would snatch up 6 men at once. And that is what she did. Before Odysseus had time to throw a spear, 6 of her men were snatched up in the 6 mouths. The men screamed in terror, "Odysseus, help us! Save us, please!" But it was too late. They disappeared into the cave 100 metres above. "What the heck-a-doodle was that?" asked Polites. "There's no time for a biology lesson now! Just row!" ordered Odysseus. The men did not need to be told twice. They pulled on their oars as hard and as fast as they could. But now they were so frightened, they were rowing out of sync, the oars clashing into each other and flailing, missing the water. "Men, calm yourselves! Row together!" urged Odysseus, again beating out a rhythm for them to follow. "If we survive this," gasped Eurylochus between strokes, "we are going to be so cross with you!" Their rowing was so disjointed the ship was beginning to be pulled back into the current of the whirlpool. "You must row, men, with all your might," pleaded Odysseus. "Why should we do what you say?" demanded Polites. "You just led 6 of our friends to a gruesome death with no warning." Odysseus glanced back up at the cave. One of the 6 heads had re-emerged. It called out to the other 5 heads. Now all 6 of them were looking down. They'd finished their first course and wanted another serving. "She's coming back for seconds!" cried Odysseus. Much as they were annoyed with Odysseus, the men did not want to be eaten by a cliff-dwelling 6-headed giant lizard, so they all rowed as hard and as fast as any man or woman or pig had ever rowed before. Scylla, the 6-headed giant lizard, lashed out of them, but this time they were just out of her reach, and the teeth of just one head brushed the stern of the ship as they pulled away. The only thing that reached them was a whiff of her foul breath. The men rowed on in silence until they were well clear of the danger. No one spoke because they were all exhausted, and even though they were all really cross with Odysseus, they were too tired to put into words the really nasty things they desperately wanted to say to her. Eventually, as the sun began to set, Polites spotted an island up ahead. "Look, we can take refuge there," cried Polites. "No," said Odysseus, "that is the island of the sun. The prophet warned me not to set foot on that island." "But we're cold and we're tired and we're really cross with you," said Eurylochus. "We want to light a fire and eat a meal and have a good long sleep." "We must not set foot on that island," said Odysseus. "Why?" asked Eurylochus. "Are there more 6-headed dragons or singing murderous sirens or deadly smashing rocks there that we need to be afraid of?" "No, not that," conceded Odysseus. "Then what, after everything we've survived, do we need to fear on the island of the sun?" asked Eurylochus. "Cows," said Odysseus. "Are they 6-headed man-eating cows?" asked Polites. "No, they're regular grass-eating cows," said Odysseus. "But the prophet warned that we must never eat one of those cows, or you men will not survive to see our homeland again." "We've got a ship full of Circe's cake," said Eurylochus. "I think we can resist the urge to eat a cow." "But the prophet warned me," began Odysseus. "You are very selective about when you tell us about warnings," said Eurylochus. "Well, we're warning you that if you don't let us go to that island and have a nap, you need to be afraid of us." Now, Odysseus did not want her men to mutiny. That would make her look very bad in the ancient Greek mythology books. So, reluctantly, she gave in to the men's demands, even though she knew it would end in certain doom. The end. Time for bed. Hey, you can't end a story with the line, "It would all end in certain doom." "Yes, I can. It's called a cliffhanger," said Nanny Piggins. "Besides, all the Greek myths are full of doom. That's what makes them so fun. Not all stories can be about pretty princesses marrying handsome princes at balls, you know. I promise the story of Odysseus will eventually end up at a royal palace with a queen and a prince, and maybe even a princess. But the Odyssey is about a really long journey, and we've still got a long way to go. Besides, we've got to go jogging." "But you hate jogging." "I know, but just as Odysseus's men needed to hurry to escape the six-headed Scylla, we must hurry if we're going to get to the sweet shop before it closes. Come on, last one, there's a rotten Cadbury mini-egg." And she took off running, the children close behind. All right, well, we'll leave it there. That's it for now. I don't think I got any messages. The Christmas show tickets are on sale. I'm going in to record the audiobook this week. I'm going to be doing Nanny Piggins 7 this week and Friday Barnes 3 next week. So there should be some new audiobooks in time for people to listen to on their road trips over the Christmas holidays. And I'm just getting stuck into Friday Barnes 14, which is coming out in June next year. And Romeo v. Juliet is pretty much wrapped up. So that's coming out in February next year. So, yeah, that's what's happening. I'm going to have a busy Christmas and New Year period getting all that ready and done. And looking forward to continuing on with Odysseus' journey next week when we see what happens on the island of the sun. Okay, that's it for now. Until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.